All right, I'll take it from here. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for attending this event sponsored by the Society of Professional Journalists, New England chapter. My name is Claire Regan, and I'm past national president of SPJ, and here tonight with Laura Mollo, also known as the crazy FOIA lady. We'll get to that in a while, and she's from Richlands, Virginia. Laura is not a journalist, but she has made headlines. In 2020, the stay-at-home mom discovered that residents of her small Virginia town, population about 5,200, couldn't call 911 like all other county residents when they had an emergency. According to Susan Cameron, a reporter for the Cardinal News, which serves Southwest and Southside Virginia. When residents called 911 there, they were put on hold while the calls were transferred to the Richlands Police Department, which handled the town's emergency calls. Laura filed hundreds and hundreds, according to the story, of Virginia Freedom of Information Act requests and has spent about $5,000 of her own money to pay for them, the Cardinal News reported. She was met with threats and intimidation, but that didn't stop her and she didn't back down. What she uncovered not only led to a change in how the town dealt with emergency calls, but it also led to the police chief's resignation, the town manager being relieved of his duties, and some members of the town council to resign. Laura is now a member of the Richlands Town Council and was honored with an award by the Virginia Coalition for Open Government, the Cardinal News reported. Congratulations for that award, Laura.
Thank you.
Well deserved, sounds like, and we're going to find out more about that. So I know you've been called the crazy, I'm putting it in quotes, air quotes, crazy FOIA lady. Was that a term that you came up with, or did the Cardinal News come up with it? Because it's in the headline on the Cardinal News. And by the way, everybody, the link is in the chat.
So that actually came from residents of Richlands, and the former town council used it as an insult, but as time went on, it kind of became a term of endearment. So
yeah, I mean, for what you went through, yes.
yeah,
I'd like to change it to call you the amazing FOIA lady. I think that's more appropriate, from the journalists here tonight, from me as a journalist. It sounds like you went through a lot to make change. And hey, that's what every journalist hopes to do, have impact and make change in the community. And you did it without being a journalist. So really, you are the amazing FOIA lady. I've recoined your name.
Thank you.
But maybe you could just take us back a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you a native of Virginia? And a little bit about your background, your family.
Okay, so I was actually born and raised here in Richlands, and I left as a young adult, married someone from out of the area. We moved back here, and when I moved back and I started to realize life is different elsewhere, I wanted to better life for people here. I've got 2 kids and a husband who have supported me just incredibly throughout this entire process. They've been with me through everything and supported me, and they are why I was able to keep going. And they're, I guess we say we're stubborn. We're all stubborn together to keep going, but we really believed in what we were doing and the change that was going to come from it. And I just wanted to improve the quality of life for people here because I saw that it was better elsewhere too.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like your family was on your side. They were a team with you. Maybe you're
absolutely
step of the way, including that expenditure that you made of $5,000. And
yeah, so I'm a stay-at-home mom. We're a one-income family, but my husband he basically just gave me free reign of what I'm doing, and the time and the support he's picked up, because we've been so used to me being a stay-at-home mom and having all of this time and everything, and he really has had to pick up some slack at the house and kind of changed how we share chores now. Instead of me being at home all the time, and now we're both outside of the home. The kids have been super patient. Everything's just kind of changed for us, but absolutely for the better.
a good way. That's great. That's great to hear. But I know it wasn't easy along the way. Maybe you could just tell us how this awareness came about. How did you become aware of this 9/11 snafu or glitch or however you want to call it? And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what it was.
So this part is, I've always said I hate telling how I had to find this out. But my mom is my neighbor, and my husband and myself and my kids, my mom and dad were out of town, and I had to get something from inside of her house. So I went through the garage. They knew that we knew they were coming back that night. So we wanted to play a trick on her, and we opened up her cabinets. Well, that wasn't as funny as we thought it was going to be, because when she came home that night, she thought, oh my gosh, someone has broken in. And it was, the middle of the night. So she called 911, and she came to over to our house, and she was like, oh my gosh, they've transferred me. I think somebody's in the house. We were like, oh, nobody's in the house. That was us. And so that's how we discovered that there is a transfer, because had someone really broken into my mom's home, it would have taken quite a bit longer for them to get there because of that transfer.
Oh, well, in that kind of situation and so many others, every second counts, right?
Yeah, and through FOIA, I actually found that out through some pretty heartbreaking situations, that every second does count.
So what was the first thing you did after you had this realization and you experienced it personally? What was the first thing you did? I mean, I'm sure you didn't think FOIA, because you weren't really aware of that, not being a journalist and all those procedural challenges. So what was your first step in raising awareness about this situation?
So my first step was to go to the town council meeting. I told my husband, I said, there's going to be audible gasps, like they just don't realize that we're supposed to have direct access to 911. So I went to that first meeting to tell them, hey, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but this is what happens when residents in town call 911. This transfer is happening. And immediately I was met with, I call it a very hostile response. Was told in a public meeting that they didn't want to hear what I had to say, that, the county sheriff was over the 911 center. And a council member actually said, if he came to Richlands, he better buckle up. He was going to get his feelings hurt. And I immediately thought, wait a minute, what's going on here? So
Did you ask any of your neighbors or any of your friends in the town in town or nearby if they knew about this situation, or did you find anybody else who suffered from it because of the delay that caused a health or life problem?
So, in all honesty, everybody says they don't believe this, but I'm a pretty shy person. I've always just kind of kept my head down, kept to myself. We just kind of pay our bills and taxes and move on. So, I didn't really talk to a lot of people to ask that question. A couple people that I did talk to, I asked, and they were aware of it. And they said, oh, they've had this battle for 20 years. So good luck, because this is just how Richlands is. It's not going to change. Other people have brought it up over the past 20 years, and this is just, we're never going to move on from it.
I know in the Cardinal news story, there's an awful situation described about how a man was cutting brush and needed emergency help. And I guess you became aware of that situation yourself.
I
You want to
did.
tell us a little bit about that situation that did not end up well, right?
So through FOIA, I started like FOIAing the calls from the county 911 center, because they have the actual audio. So I was FOIAing their calls and their time sheets compared to the town of Richlands. The county and the sheriff's office were beyond easy to work with. They would give me everything. I would try to do it, 5 to 10 at a time, so I wasn't overwhelming them. But they would send everything. I would have the stuff from the county days and days before. I would have the stuff from Richlands. The county would send it right over. And in one of the calls, I heard a lady who was transferred from Richlands. And she explained that her husband was cutting brush and it was burning the brush, and that he had collapsed and that he was laying in the burning brush. And the Richlands dispatcher, who, a big thing was that Richlands dispatchers were not emergency medical dispatcher trained. So it would be the equivalent of me picking up a phone and dispatching that call. So she was on the phone with the lady, and she just kept going on and on about. She actually at one point said, "Well, it's just been so busy for us here today. I'm about to eat my gravy cold. My gravy has gotten cold," and the lady's just begging for the ambulance to be dispatched. And the call went on for probably about half an hour. And then at the end of the call, the 911 dispatcher actually called the lady back, and she said, "Ma'am, I just, was thinking about you and wanted to check in to see, how, if Richlands got help to you." And the lady told the dispatcher that Richlands ambulance had finally arrived in time to pull her husband's dead body out of the
Yeah.
brush fire.
Passed by. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. And calls like that made me realize that this wasn't just, a pride thing for Richlands, that this was literally life and death, and that they have been battling this for 20 years, and the council just didn't want to hear it. So I knew that, somebody had to keep going.
Yeah. It makes you wonder. I mean, I'm in New York City, so
Mhm,
this whole scenario seems just so impossible in New York City,
mhm,
and here we know that the dispatch, when you call, that person talks you through the emergency and
mhm,
gives you advice on how to resuscitate or, tourniquet or whatever needs to be done while the ambulance is on its way. And
mhm,
then, ambulance arrivals are timed here, 3 minutes. We're very proud in New York City of how quick the response times can be for fire,
mhm.
medical, EMS. So it just seems so incredulous that that had been the routine there. And I guess nobody thought of it because thought anything of it because it had been routine for so many years. It sounds like you just 20 years or so. That was
Yeah.
the system.
Mhm. And I did find out later that something that I firmly believe, that the situation in the police department went a lot deeper, um, than even, I don't know how to say it nicely, but basically there were some people in the police department at that time that were directly benefiting from us holding on to that dispatch, because they were getting overtime to the tune of
Oh,
over
yeah,
$100,000 a year in overtime to
wow,
run that dispatch. So it did beg the question with me of, what is the motivation here?
yeah,
And that made me even more angry that, you know, we might be in danger just to kind of pad pockets, essentially.
yeah. Do you? I'm going to go back to your FOIA-ing in a minute, but have you come across? Do you know if there are any other towns in America that are enduring the same kind of situation? Have you come across any, or has anybody reached out to you from another town?
So I haven't looked outside of Virginia, but we were the last locality in the Commonwealth of Virginia to be going through this.
Oh, okay.
I reached out to every local official, all the way up to the governor's office, and they basically told me I just had to vote them out. They said, this is their decision if this is what they want to hold on to. But I did find a law in Virginia that, you weren't allowed in Virginia, you're not allowed to use any other number for an emergency other than 911. So I tried to fight them with that, the fact that we were using 276-964-9134 rather than 911. So they had to remove it from all the cars, all of the letterhead, the website, and everything. Um, and I
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so to call an emergency, you had to call in that long number with the area code?
yes, ma'am.
And
And
the public even know this number? Was it promoted or advertised or?
It was not. And when I asked about it, they told me, well, everybody's just used to it. And I said, well, what about me, who's not used to it? And, another thing that came up was like with the cell phones, a lot of domestic violence shelters will give out cell phones that are, don't have service on it, or even prepaid phones that don't have minutes, because they can still dial 911. They cannot dial 276-964-9134. My husband is a manager of a store in town, and his store telephone number was 276-964-9143. So those two numbers were just opposed. And, he had a lot of calls from people calling his store and asking for the police department. So it was creating even more confusion there. And anytime the telephone lines went down, 911 is kind of on its own system. So when the telephone lines go down, we've still got 911 access. Well, that wasn't the case in Richlands. And there was one point that the phones went down and they weren't back up for about 50 something hours. And I said, what would happen if there was an emergency? And I was told to call the police chief's cell phone. And I said, well, what about me, who doesn't know that number? A lot of people who are just in the dark about it.
So let's take a step back. How you first became aware of the situation with the 911 and after that incident at home. And what was your first FOIA step? You went to the town council meeting and you were sort of dismissed, it sounds like, right? So where did FOIA come into play after that?
So when I went to the town council meeting and I brought this up, the person on the council at the time, and this is public record, I'm not just saying this, it's easily provable. He actually said that he had no desire to talk to the sheriff about 911, and that if the sheriff came to our town, he better buckle up because he would get his feelings hurt. And I was like, no, wait a minute. Well, it was a crazy response. So a citizen actually told me that this person on the town council was an active duty police officer. And I asked and was told, no, he isn't. He retired a couple years ago. And I told the citizen, oh, he retired. And they said, no, he is an active duty police officer. So I asked again, is this council person an employee of the Richlands Police Department? And I was told, oh, no, he retired a couple years ago. And the citizen said, that is not true. He's got a police car, he's in a uniform. And I said, there's got to be a way for me to find out for sure. So I filed that FOIA request for a roster of police officers. And that was actually the first FOIA that I filed.
And who did you file it with? How did you file it? Or how did you know what to do? Or where did you go? Or did you go online to figure it out?
I did. Yeah, I Googled. I just Googled if I could ask that, because I didn't even know that I could ask that. So I found out I could ask it, and I asked, I believe I asked the police chief.
Okay, so you're telling us about your very first FOIA request with the police department. And did it take a long time? It was your first one. You went online to figure out how to do it. And how long did it take before you got results? Because sometimes FOIA requests can go on for quite some time.
Yeah, so I actually didn't get a response at all. And I thought, oh, well, this is horrible. So I started Googling again, and I found a group in Virginia, the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. And I called the number that was on the website, and Megan Ryan, their director, actually picked up the phone and answered. And I just explained what had happened. And she walked me through the process, and she said, they have to answer you, and this is information you can have. So, I went back to them, to the town manager at that point, and I told them, I know I can get this. This is the law. This is what's going on. And they were going to give it to me. But at that point, I was met with quite a bit of resistance. That's kind of where everything started to spiral for me. They told me that, I was really concerned because I'm a one-income family. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I was really concerned because they would tell me, like the police chief told me, that he knew my husband he knew where he worked, and that my husband did a lot of community events.
So how long did it take? How many weeks did you wait weeks to get that information from the police department? Meanwhile, you felt a little intimidated, it sounds like.
Yeah, because they told me they knew where my husband worked, and he did a lot of community events. And they said, if he even has a Boy Scout troop selling hot dogs in his parking lot, we're going to shut it down, and we're going to go over and say the manager's wife is a troublemaker. So I was getting a little bit concerned at that point. So after I did get it, it did take a couple weeks. And after I did get it, and I realized that council member was at that point was an active duty police officer for the town. And I thought, okay, wait a minute, something's not right. Why would they lie about that?
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you think some of the intimidation you felt was because you're not a journalist and you're just, oh, here's a regular old community resident stay-at-home mom who's
Mhm.
digging into our affairs? Do you think a journalist would have been treated differently, or do you have no idea about that?
Oh, I really don't know. I think probably anybody would have been met with that resistance at that point, because I had been told that people had tried this for 20 years with the 911 thing. And at one point, the now mayor, he had asked me, why do you think that you're the only one who has come back? And I said, well, probably because people don't want to put up with like poop in their mailbox. They don't want to go through what I've been through. So when people would get met with resistance, they would kind of back off. And that's kind of what they expected from me. But that's just not who I am.
Not
So
you. Yeah. They were surprised. A little bit of an assumption made there and then a surprise, right?
yeah.
Assumptions lead to mistakes. So how many FOIA requests did you file over the many months, I guess it was, right?
Years. Yeah. Um,
Years.
gosh, that's such a hard question.
Dozens or hundreds?
Hundreds. Yeah, I would say I was probably teetering on 1,000 between the
Wow.
county and everything. The county was super easy to work with, and the cost was so small with the county. They waived it. I think out of the county FOIAs, I maybe paid for 4 of them. But I came to a point in Richlands where, I mean, I would practically ask what time it was, and they would tell me to file a FOIA request and send me an invoice for it.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so there's a fee every time you file for a FOIA request.
Mhm.
Ranges, I guess. What was the least expensive to the most expensive that you paid?
The least expensive I paid was 7 cents, and the most expensive was, about $70,
Oh, wow.
because we actually came to a point where that got brought up by a council member, by the active duty police officer council member, actually. And he said, she's not paying for these. It's costing the town thousands of dollars every month that we have to file them. And I had the receipts, literally. I was keeping the invoices and the receipts. And, I understand that there's a charge if it's taken someone a while to get something, but 7 cents, I really realized that this was beyond recouping costs for them. This was trying to prove a point.
Did you ever get, or was there any chance that you could get reimbursed since you did, all of your work resulted in action? Is there still any chance that you could get reimbursed for your $5,000?
I wouldn't think so. And at this point now where I'm on the council, I am just, my goal was never, any financial gain. There was an incident that happened to me that attorneys from all over the Commonwealth reached out to me and they said, this is it, let's take them to court and sue them. And that was never my end game there. And in the midst of that, the former mayor resigned. And I said, well, that's the win, that
Yeah.
was the goal, was that change. So
You just mentioned about your mailbox. I know that some of the intimidation tactics were to put things in your mailbox, including spaghetti. Was that one? Can you describe? There are 2 incidents in particular.
yeah,
Something
with the
in your
mailbox.
And
Mhm.
and tell us about that, and when along the way did it happen? Like, what were you looking into at that very time? What FOIA requests were you making at that time where these mailbox incidents happened? First, tell us what was put in your mailbox.
Uh, the two things put in my mailbox, the first one was poop was put in my mailbox. And I actually opened my mailbox with my kids in the car with me when that happened. I was really concerned because I thought if someone's watching me to see my reaction, and that now I've got my kids with me. The other was spaghetti. And everyone at the time knew, because there was a comment made, kind of a racial slur comment toward my husband, and people knew that, he's Italian. And then we opened the mailbox, we had all of the spaghetti. And, both times I called, I actually had to call the sheriff's office, not our local police department, because of obvious reasons. But they took care of it and everything, and had a lot of surveillance on my house at that time. I had to put cameras up, and
Oh,
and the FOIA that I was looking into was about our mowing costs. Um, I realized in Richlands that we had insane mowing costs, and we were outsourcing that to a third party. So when I asked about those mowing costs, the one thing that the council at that time could agree on was that they loved the mowing man. I call him the mowing man, and that they loved the
talking
mowing man.
about lawn mowing
Lawn mowing,
of
yeah.
of town property.
So, yep.
Okay.
And at that, I mean, relatively small area, but there were some months that we were writing, $60,000 checks for
Oh,
mowing.
wow.
So I started looking into those costs, and that's where the intimidation really ramped up.
Hmm. Was there an investigation about the mailbox incidents, and did anything come of that? Did you find out anything about the culprits?
No, there was an investigation. The sheriff's office was great. They came, they actually cleaned it up for us and took a report, and we had surveillance on our home. And once we put the cameras up, people didn't mess with the mailbox again.
That's good.
Mhm.
Did you get any, pushback from residents, community members who wanted things to stay the way they were for
Mhm.
some unknown reason? Or was most of the pushback from officials?
Well, the community members that pushed back were either very, very close friends or family of those officials. A lot of it was at that time the police department, quite honestly. Um, and especially in Southwest Virginia, small town Southwest Virginia, you do not go against your first responders.
Mm.
And it wasn't
Mhm.
anything to do with the job. It
Right.
was to do with what was,
System.
yeah. So it was mostly just friends and family of those officials, but citizens for the most part, I mean, they were beyond supportive. People would come to my home to thank me. They would buy our meals. If my family were out to eat, they would buy our dinner and thank me. People would try to track my husband down to try to just tell him, tell her thank you, and that we need her to keep going, that nobody's ever done this for us before. So,
That's wonderful. So they turned around and saw you as an advocate, which is great.
mhm. Oh yeah. And then when the big incident hit with me being pulled over before the meeting, and it happened directly in the middle of town. um, Citizens swarmed me. They protected me. They came out of their cars. They were recording it. And
Can you just give us a little background context about that? You were pulled over on your way to a town hall meeting?
yeah, so toward the end of my fight there, I um, came in and I told them, at this point, I think that you guys are knowingly aware of the dangers of this transfer. And I believe that it could pose a legal threat to the town, if people see what's happened and you guys have not acted on it. So I told them I wasn't going to leave the podium until they made a motion and allowed the sheriff to come and have a conversation with us, just talk about it. And at the time, the mayor at that point, he said he didn't want to do that. He said he wanted to table the 911 discussion for a full year. And I said, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. We need to talk about it. And I refused to leave the podium. The town attorney actually got involved and he said, you can't table the motion. The council would have to do that. You can't table the discussion. The council would have to do that. So it came down to a very divided council. And the now mayor actually broke the tie and he said, I may not agree with what she's saying, but I think a discussion is worthy. So they had a meeting, they scheduled a meeting with the sheriff for the very next week. The county officials, the sheriff, our local elected state officials, and it was a public meeting, but they said that I would be able to come and speak. So the night of that meeting started at I guess 6 or 7, but an hour before the meeting, I was driving through town and I was pulled over. And I hadn't done anything wrong. They said they wanted to check my tags, check my license and everything. And that stop took over 50 minutes. So I was late to the
To
meeting.
delay you from getting to the meeting.
Yeah, and I hadn't done my hair or anything. I was sitting there in the parking lot crying. So when I got they thought I guess would go home after, but I walked into the meeting anyway with my tear-stained face and my messy hair and just
Wow.
kept going. And then after that, citizens suspected, but it was told to the town council that in private that the then mayor had asked the police chief to do that. And when that incident happened and some of the council members came to me and they said, hey, this is what we were told, this is what happened. And I was like, Eureka, I knew I would never prove it, but him admitting it was a big step. So when that happened, I said, okay, now I'm going to start a recall petition. And he had a family member who worked in the court. And as soon as I filed it on a Monday. He quit the very next day.
Wow.
When he resigned, I said there was no need for further action.
Oh.
I didn't want to sue the town. It was over, done. He quit. That was the big picture.
Going back to all those FOIA requests, what one had the most impact for you in your investigation of the situation? What really made it clear for you? Was there one discovery in the information? It sounds like you listened to a lot of audio.
Mm-hmm. The audio.
Both of your requests were for the audio call-ins, calls.
Mm-hmm.
You just listened to them and you took notes, or what did you do?
So I would, from the county side of it, I would listen to the audio and I would see what time that call came in. And then from the town side of it, I would compare what time the call came in to the time of actual dispatch, because it wasn't necessarily a delay in service from the rescue squad or the police department or the fire department. It was a delay in the actual dispatch. So I would listen, and I wanted to get a full impact of what I was dealing with here, because I was dealing with human beings with lives here. So when I would get both of those timesheets, I would listen to the call to see, is somebody panicked? Are they scared, or are they just like, oh, okay, this is not a big deal that you're transferring me. And 99% of the time, the people would, as soon as they would say, I'm sorry, I can't dispatch this call, I'm going to have to put you on hold and transfer you, 99% of the time, that person went into a complete panic. And then sometimes Richlands wouldn't even pick up. So it would create even more of a delay. So listening to those calls.
Explain the situation twice too, sometimes?
Yes, they did have to, because legally 911 had to create their own record. So if I called and I said, I'm Laura Mollo, this is my address, this is what's going on, then they would hear my address and they would say, I'm sorry, I can't dispatch this call. They would put you on hold. They would transfer you to Richlands, who would pick up, and then you would have to go through the entire thing again.
You have to think about how horrific that is for somebody to be put on hold when there's a life and death situation.
Mm-hmm.
Be
Yeah.
having breathing problems or can't, or choking or heart
Mhm.
attack, stroke, whatever, to be put on hold. That's that seems to be what you really highlighted.
Oh yeah, people were panicked. I mean, they didn't realize, most people didn't realize though that that wasn't normal. They thought this is just how the 911 system worked.
Yeah.
So when I started talking to them and telling them about, that this is not how this is supposed to work. 911 is supposed to be able to dispatch and save that time. So those calls, the cold gravy call, as I call it, that one will always, um,
Stands out. Yeah.
yeah, haunt me. And then from a budgetary side, I would get, because I realized this was going a lot deeper, so I would get the budget, like the ledgers each month, and when I would see what was being spent, I thought, this goes a lot deeper than I realized.
Wow. Did you feel like things were starting to go your way after a while? Like, after so many FOIA requests and you had the evidence and you made your case. Did you feel like, was there a turning point where you were starting to make progress and get the right attention instead of the negative attention?
Yeah. So when the council members started to quit, I thought, most of them had been there 16, 17, 18 years. And when they started to quit, I thought, okay, I'm making progress here. And when I knew that, I was going to run for a seat, I was concerned because I told you earlier, we moved here
Mm.
from out of the area. So there are 4 Mallos in the entire county where everyone knows everyone. And that's me, my husband, and our 2 kids. So
Wow.
I knew I didn't have the right connections. I didn't have the right last name. I knew that they would outspend me, but I would outwork them. So when they started to quit, I thought, okay, this is something big is happening here. And they didn't run for reelection, and that worked out really well.
Did you figure out was the reason for their resignations because they didn't want to be involved, or was the resignation indicative of some kind of involvement or guilt or?
Yeah, so I think, because we have a local newspaper here who, the person who writes for that newspaper became, um, just vital to this story. She was covering everything from a very, um, unbiased point of view. She was just printing the facts of what was going on. And when people were seeing that, and they were seeing what, the council members were doing to combat me and to come at me personally, people started to really kind of pay more attention. And I think for so long, like when I first went to that first meeting, I was by myself in there. And it took about 2 years for people to really start coming to the meetings, and I asked people why, and they told me that basically they thought if they were gonna get involved and they were gonna question this elite group of people, they didn't want me to drag them into it and then me take off and then, they go through what I was going through, so they wanted to make sure that I was really in it for the long haul, that I wasn't going anywhere. So now we have pretty full meetings, but I think that for so long that council got away with
Mm.
whatever they wanted to do, whatever they wanted to say. There was nobody watching
Well,
until we
that's
did.
where, yeah, I mean, journalists, what we do is we hold the powerful accountable. And
Mhm.
you were doing that without being a journalist, really. That's what you were doing.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
yeah, kudos for you for that. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Because I guess in a small town too, it's more likely to the situation to be that way. Um,
Mhm.
where there's sort of a cluster or a clique of people, and it's hard to break it up, right, in a small town.
It was virtually impossible. The mayor at that time was the father-in-law of the active duty police officer who was on the council. So when people would say to me, vote them out, I remember calling a former, not our current state senator, but a former state senator. And I cried when his aide told me, just vote them out, vote them out. I cried and I said,
Mhm.
they're related. Like, what happens here when you've got so many people kind of clustered up in this situation, and then the outsider comes and you're trying to bust it up? So I did have to, during my election, I did have to just kind of outwork everyone. I was going to early voting, to campaign at early voting from 8 in the morning till 4:30. I would come home, make dinner, and I would go door knocking until the sun went down. And
Wow. When did you decide to run for the council? Was that sort of after you finished your work with the FOIAs and the proving the situation that was wrong and explaining that to everybody and making a point? When did you decide to run for the council?
I'll be honest, I don't think I ever really did. A lot of people were kind of pushing me in that
Oh,
direction.
wonderful.
Um,
Okay.
Citizens were kind of saying, we don't have any other option other than for you to do this. And then after a couple of years of this going on, I kind of thought, they're not hearing us. This isn't like a situation where we're going to them and saying, hey, this is going really wrong and this is what we want you to do. And they're saying, oh, okay, let us serve the people. They weren't doing that. So when I realized that it was not really changing and I had all of that support, I just decided, I talked to my family about it and I said, I think this is it. I think, people, I remember I was sitting in a drive-through and a friend called my husband and said, hey, we've got the signatures for her to run. This is happening. You guys need to just accept it. And even at that point, I was like, nah, I'm not a politician. I don't really want to do this, but worked
Well,
out.
also tell us that you're shy. That's hard to believe. I this process has pulled you out of your shell.
It really has.
That's wonderful. Is the town council there in Richlands, is it a volunteer position or is there like a stipend or something?
There is a stipend. I
Good.
think our stipend's like 100, I think $112 a month after taxes are taken out. Um, I did the math a couple months ago, and I think well, for one, I'm actually paying to serve on the town
Uh,
council, but mathematically, with the time that I personally put into it, I think I'm making like 0.001 of a cent, per hour.
oh,
Um,
I
and
was
I
hoping you'd make back some of that 5,000, but that's not gonna.
That's not happening, and I do take my stipend, and people knew this, that I said I would take my stipend and put it back into, uh, like, town charities or something to help the town because, I've got nothing to gain here. I don't own a business. I'm not, but people will say, "Oh, you are part of the government now," but, I'm not part of that elite group. I have nothing to gain from doing this. I just really wanna understand how this works, how things went so terribly wrong for us, because through FOIA, I found out that, our town had not been paved in years, and the state was giving us money to pave. We were taking that money, putting it back into, mostly probably 60% of that money was going to toward paying mowing bills. So our town has not been paved in about 5 years, and we actually are changing that. The paving will start actually this month, at the end of this month, and that'll be the first time we've seen paving here in 5 years. So,
That's
you know,
great.
I'm,
So the
I'm
FOIA,
excited.
it's really, it's continuing to help improve your town. The
Oh
FOIA.
yeah.
And what 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 advice do you have for people filing FOIA requests? I mean, since you've filed so many of them and you were successful in the end with the information that you gathered, what is the process? I guess it varies from state to state slightly, right? But was it complex for you in Virginia? And would you like it to be streamlined? Do you have any suggestions? I don't know why there's a cost associated with it. That's
Mhm.
cool too, I guess, right? But um,
Yeah. I
what
would like
suggestions do you
to
have for improving the process?
I would like to see the state government. I always tell people that I use FOIA, and I know some people use FOIA as a weapon on both sides of it, but I see FOIA as a tool, not a weapon. But I would like to see the state hold the government a little bit more accountable for like those costs so that people aren't using costs to discourage people from filing FOIA requests. My biggest piece of advice that I tell people is don't overcomplicate it. Like you can Google a FOIA request and there'll be this big form of, I'm filing a FOIA request based on this state code and this is what I want and this is why I want it. My FOIA requests don't look like that. My FOIA request is, hey, I'm requesting the budget sheet for, the current fiscal year. If there's a cost associated with this request, please provide an estimate prior to filling the request for my approval. That's all that I say. And I know that that scares people. I've had a lot of people say, "Can I just ask why you're asking for this?" And for the most part, I'm not trying to be difficult. Like any other agency aside from Richlands, I would say, "Oh yeah, this is what I'm looking for." And they might come back and say, "I was just wondering," or let me give you this instead because it's going to provide more information. But with Richlands, I couldn't do that because it was putting a target on my back.
Were there any requests that you had to refile multiple times because you were turned down? How many times were you turned down for your information?
I was turned down quite a bit, and they didn't really turn me down in the sense of saying, I'm not going to give it to you, but they would send me, after I would pay for something, they would send me sheets that were 100% redacted. Like the only thing not redacted on it would be a date.
And
And
so
I
what
would have
would you refile a FOIA?
I did. I would go back and I would say, hey, why are you redacting this? Because if you're redacting, you have to cite the code, to redact this. And most of the time they would come back and give me what I was asking for after a couple of times. And we did have a change in town attorneys at one point. Um, and he told me before he left, he said, he said, I know what they're going to say, that it's because of you. He said, it's not. I just want to tell you that. And he kind of helped me with a couple FOIA things that he basically told me to send my wish list to him before he left, and he would take care of it as his gift to me. So that was a huge thing for me.
Wow.
And then we got a new town attorney, and they
Wow.
weren't they weren't difficult, um, but the council was. But
So, you're serving on the town council. How long is that term for you?
4 years.
And you just got elected in the last year or so, or
So January made 1 year that I've been
got
there.
6 weeks to go?
Mhm.
Um, what do you see down the road? I mean, from what we've learned tonight, you would make an excellent journalist in any newsroom, would welcome you with all those skills you have for digging, being persistent, and just, curious, aware, and having so much impact. What are you thinking of doing after your term is over? Running for another term or maybe applying to a newsroom somewhere?
I no, I think after this that I'm just going to maybe slink back off into the shadows to because my goal, and I spent this last year as at UVA's Weldon Cooper Center Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership. And I'm a graduate from that program. We traveled the Commonwealth for 3 or 4 days each month last year, and we visited different localities, met with their elected officials to see what was going on, how they're dealing with it, and really civility in politics. And this year, I have started. We are one of only 13 localities in the Commonwealth that owns their own electric grid. So I've started becoming public power certified.
Oh,
I'm the only council member taking these classes right now, and it's just something I want to do because I want to serve the people to the best of my ability. But my goal is that after this 4 years, that we have an influx of people ready to run for this seat that are the stay-at-home moms or the stay-at-home dad, or, the person who might not necessarily be the wealthiest in town, but that people see that the average person can take this seat, and that with enough heart and research that they can do it too.
Have impact in their own community, their own hometown. Yeah, there's nothing more rewarding than that, right? I mean, and how is the council receiving you? Are you, you've moved past the issue that's been resolved, by the way, right? So now tell us what happens with the 911 calls now.
Now with 911, I am so happy to say that 911 dispatches our calls. There is no transfer. We are a 6-member council, and all 6 of the members that I battled during this resigned their seats.
Okay.
All 6 of them. So we have an entirely new council. We have a new mayor, a new police chief, a new finance director, and a new town manager. We just had a forensic audit completed. It took over a year to complete. That report came out in February, just last month. And I will not get emotional when I say this, but the report came back, and the very things that I was pointing out, like specifically with the mowing man, the overtime in the police department, those were the things that were pinged in the forensic audit that were wrong. So I felt vindicated kind
Yeah.
of.
Yes.
But those people are gone, and we've got new people in those positions. Things are going in a really, really great direction. People are starting to actually see their tax dollars at work. And I've kind of become the people, the people person on the council that people feel welcome to knock on my door. Had someone knock on my door a few days ago and just say, "Hey, thank you for what you've done." It was an older gentleman, and he said, "I never thought I would live to see the day that things are actually improving here." And it's been good. I think I'll always have a couple people who are a little bit bitter about,
Mhm.
because things went for so long. Like
Mhm.
when we hired the new police chief, we had a mass exodus of officers where 12 officers just left and quit. And it was scary. And for people who didn't know the story, they were looking at it and saying, what has she done? And for some reason, people pointed that finger at me, but and I say the same thing about myself. I want transparency, accountability. I want people to see their tax dollars at work for them. And I expect people to hold me as accountable as I held someone else. And now when people try to file a FOIA request, and if they go to the town, and they do, but somebody might say to me, "Hey, I saw you guys reading this paper. Can I file a FOIA request for this?" And I'll say, "Yeah, absolutely. However, you don't have to, because if you want it, I'll let you see it. I'll give you a copy of mine, because I just want to make it."
Transparency. That's great to hear.
They're going to get it anyway. When people have a more open dialogue, they're giving me the benefit of the doubt, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's their tax money, so look away.
Well, that's a big virtue among journalists is transparency. So it's I'm grateful to hear that you're bringing that to your town. That's wonderful. And not to be overly dramatic, but you are saving lives with the change that you made. I mean, I hope you understand that that's what we hear. That's what I hear. Just those seconds that you're saving in that, life and death transaction on the phone.
Mhm.
Who knows how many lives you've already saved, Laura?
Thank you.
Yeah, so really, you should be proud, and you did that all without any kind of journalism training. All those FOIA requests, really amazing. You're persistent, professional, courageous. I mean,
Thank
all the greatest traits that many journalists aim for, right? And you were very successful, really very
thank
successful in all your efforts and your expenses. Um, so that's why I am calling you the amazing FOIA lady.
thank you very much.
We have a new adjective now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think your skills in FOIA requests is really, it's very helpful. I mean, maybe SPJ will call upon you to give a little workshop on how to go about it, because it sounds like you really know the ropes on how to get a FOIA request through.
Yeah, I had to learn some tips and tricks, and absolutely couldn't have done it without the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. Megan has become a dear friend of mine at this point that, when I couldn't, she supported me even in an emotional level because I could never let anyone kind of see me sweat.
Yeah.
I would have these conversations where I was big and tough and then come home and cry. And I would tell Megan that. And, she empowered me with the tools of FOIA so that I knew that I was right and I was comfortable where I was. So I try to do that for other people now at any point, any chance I get, that citizens holding their government accountable is vital.
I'm glad to hear you had an advocate. You found an advocate to help you through the process. And Richlands is richer because you're there. And also, I mean, you're so approachable. It seems like you're very approachable. I'm sure a lot of people feel comfortable coming up to you and telling you about an issue or a problem because you are a problem solver.
I always tell people I might not know the answer, but I am the big
Find
mouth who will
out.
advocate. But
You'll
yeah, I
you'll
will
have to
find it
find out.
out. That's
That's great.
right.
Laura Mollo, thank you so much. We're about an hour here, so I'm going to wrap it up. And really, congratulations to you. And I don't live in Richlands, but I want to thank you anyway.
Thank
The
you.
town is better off because of all your efforts as a citizen journalist, really.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story tonight. Thank you very much.
Every day appreciates it. Thank you very much. All right, good night.
Good night.